Hi, I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Year Round, and today we're talking about Civil War. So, to begin, in 1860, President Lincoln was first elected, and at that point, the first wave of Southern states seceded.
Western forces will reach the White House on July 4th.
Oh my God.
Get in the car! Get in the car!
God bless America.
Oh, no, I meant the new 2024 movie Civil War, written and directed by Alex Garland, a movie that is very, very hitting close to home, kind of a touchy subject for some people. Um, but I'm going to get into why this movie, there's a lot I liked about it. There's some stuff I didn't like about it. The biggest thing about it is it's not quite what you think. So I'm going to get into spoilers, but I'll warn you when I'm going to do that. First and foremost, this movie is not, it's not like a commentary of like, the loyalist forces are meant to represent this political party and the rebel forces are meant to represent this political party, and like it's not like a one-to-one comparison. It's not purge election year levels of like not subtle political commentary, like in your face, violent, loud, and nasty. There's plenty of that other stuff, but it's in a different way. What this movie is kind of a, I hesitate to call it a cautionary tale because it's just fantasy enough. It's just far enough removed from our own world that we can kind of observe it semi-objectively, and I think that's kind of the point Alex Garland was going for. So we have a team of journalists led by Lee and Joel. Lee is played, of course, by Kirsten Dunst. I know her best. I mean, she's a very famous child actor in the 90s. I know her best as Mary Jane from the Spider-Man movies, and some other people along for the ride. You have a really good kind of camaraderie between this group of journalists, and as they're traveling through the country as it's going through the Civil War with the goal of reaching DC and interviewing the president, who has not given an interview in a long time, and who was also played by Nick Offerman. Yes, this movie has President Ron Swanson.
My idea of a perfect government is one guy who sits in a small room at a desk, and the only thing he's allowed to decide is who to nuke.
And as excited as I was to see President Ron Swanson, one of the things I'm kind of disappointed about is he's really not in it that much. He like barely gets 5 minutes of screen time. He's kind of more like an idea than he is a character. Like the most you get of him is like hearing him give speeches over the radio as they're driving. But I certainly don't want to. I don't want my expectation of that to kind of sour my enjoyment of the film, and there's certain things that I kind of don't want to hold against the movie because I don't think it's fair. So let's start with the positive. Let's start with what I liked about it. Alex Garland is an exceptional director. It's a shame that he says he's done with directing. He just wants to write from now on. This is like the last movie he's going to direct because he's very good at it. The war scenes, I think it's common in a lot of war movies, actually, a lot of Civil War movies. I'm looking at you, Gettysburg from the 90s, where people felt like it was almost glorifying the war. Like you had the swelling music playing and the people charging, and oh, look how brave and heroic they are. This movie has none of that. Most of the battle scenes they're close quarters, they're nasty, they're loud, they're violent. There's no music playing, and you're just watching people kill each other, and it's horrific, and it should be horrific. So I think that it definitely drives home the emotional point, and kind of putting it, having the movie focus on journalists. I like how it kind of turns them into audience surrogates. I think that's a really interesting idea, and I think the movie really, really makes of that. That being said, you can definitely tell that. Now, I know this movie had a budget of $50 million, and it's the most expensive movie A24 has ever produced. So That's on the table. That being said, it does show its budget at times. And by that, I mean, a lot of the battles are between like this small militia group and this small militia group. Even like the whole third act, which I guess we can get into spoilers now. By the time we get to this final fight where, the Western forces are advancing on DC, they're going to get to the White House, they're going to assassinate the president, they're going to end this war once and for all. It's a much smaller scale than it should be for a moment like this. Like, it's a squad of like 5 people that get into the White House. And in reality, it would be like this would be a much like this is like Berlin in 1945. This would be like all sides, forces coming in, all kind of things happening. And I don't want to hold it against the movie, but I do have to point out like it's not as logical and plausible as I think I wanted it to be. Like, for example, they get into the White House and spoilers, they get to the president, they kill him. And why is he not hiding in the bunker that's underneath the White House? Why was he not evacuated to like NORAD or anywhere the second those Western forces, got within the city limits or within like 50 miles of it? Like, there for a man who knew these forces were coming to get him, he really didn't plan ahead to like there was no escape plan. There was no, like, he was just chilling in the White House. And not just that, but the logistics, I think, and the politics. Now I know, and I'm gonna get into this in a minute. Um, I kind of wish they had explained just kind of how that worked a little bit more, because it's a little confusing. Because like the map they put out shows the Western forces as like the Northwest, but they're separate from California and Texas. But then in the movie, they refer to them as the Western forces of California and Texas. And then you also have the Florida Alliance, and it's not quite clear like who's fighting whom. Or like you see the journalists traveling. They start in New York City and they're traveling down south. You see them go through like Western Pennsylvania, and there's fighting going on there. And it's like, who's fighting in Western Pennsylvania? It's that's all loyalist territory. Like, are there, like, there were so many things that I think, not that I want the movie to kind of spoon feed you, but like at least let us know that there's something there to eat, if that makes sense. I just wish it had gone a little bit more into that. It's a very subjective movie, and I kind of was looking for something more objective. Again, that's just my personal bias, and I'm trying not to hold that against the movie. However, the biggest surprise I think people are going to have from it is this movie really does not go as far as it could into like the political allegory, into ultimately its thesis is war is bad. And that seems kind of simplistic, but you could argue that, given what the movie is obviously hinting at, given the instability that the movie is obviously referencing and that the filmmakers are aware of in the real world, maybe war is bad is kind of where we're back to. Maybe war is bad is the thing that extremists on both sides need to hear right now. Anyone who actually is thinking, oh, let's have a civil war, like, needs to think, actually, that would be detrimental to everyone. And I'm an optimist. I think of myself as a realist. I think the vast majority of people, both political sides, would agree that no one actually wants a civil war and that it would be horrific. And I think that's the point the movie really drives home, is just you're witnessing the horrors of it. You're seeing it from the point of view of these journalists. Kirsten Dunst's character Lee, I really like her because you see her as someone who you admire her courage and kind of like the courage of like what it takes to be a war journalist. It's a very, very dangerous profession. I mean, these are people that they don't have the training, they're not armed, and they're often killed right alongside, soldiers fighting, it's a very I would do it. I would not. I can't imagine the courage it would take to like go into an active war zone to take pictures. And it's all like me as a historian. I was a history major. That was the whole speech at the beginning. I think that you need like what she's doing, the pictures and documents she's collecting are going to be used by future historians, and it's like that's what we're going to study, and there's an importance to that. However, the movie doesn't shy away from kind of the how desensitized it makes her, or how she's able to, she's watching people die in horrific ways, and she's kind of just like, snap, take the picture, like no effect, no emotion. And I think you kind of have to be in that because I don't. And she even says it in the movie to the younger photographer that she's training that you know you have to suppress all that. You can't ask questions because the second you start, you never stop. You're not there to judge. You're not there. You're just there to observe. This is what it is. And in a larger sense, I feel like that's kind of a metaphor for what this movie is. Civil War, the movie, is not saying this side is right, this side is wrong, this side is more likely to start a war than this side's going to do this. The movie is just saying, here's a civil war. It's horrible. It's disgusting. It's nasty. Honestly, I think the scene that hit me hardest wasn't even one of the war scenes. There's a scene where they go to this like almost like refugee camp in like a stadium where you just have all these people there in tents and they're trying to get by. It's and you see like you just see like families there. You see kids just trying to be kids and playing, and you see that they've created this like very makeshift school for the kids, and that kind of hit me hardest. I'm a father. I have two kids, 5 and 2, and I thought about like all the greater implications, of a civil war. I thought about, what would that do to them? Like it's not just the matter of like, oh, I hope our street doesn't get blown up today. I hope we don't die in the crossfire. But it's like life as we know it, society as we know it is gone. Things aren't guaranteed. Goods, services, they're not, the supply trains aren't running because there's fighting happening. And there's a really poignant line that Lee says in the movie. She says, she covered all these wars in foreign countries, and she felt that every picture she took was a warning sending back home. But it's like they're doing it here, and I think that the scariest thing about the movie is we Americans, we've been very fortunate. We've been very, dare I use the word, privileged in the sense that the last time a war was fought on our soil was the last Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Now, mind you, that's not to say that the civilians didn't suffer during the war. They certainly did. There were 50,000 civilian casualties during the war that very rarely get talked about. But that was a time before you had air forces bombing cities, before you had nuclear weapons, before you had just warfare industrialized. That doesn't happen until World War One, and then even more so with World War Two. And I know we've had certain, we had Pearl Harbor, we had 9/11, and those were tragic, horrific events, but they were singular events that happened in one location. We've never had the misfortune of a war breaking out in our, on our home turf in any of our lives, or even any of our grandparents or our great grandparents' lives. So to see that stuff happening here at home, it's chilling, and I think that's kind of the I hesitate to say, part of me wishes the movie had gone even further with its commentary, and there's a lot more it could have said. But maybe in doing so, it risked alienating someone, or alienating something, or taking a misstep over here. And by holding back just enough, I think it, by being a little more broad and general in terms of the politics of it, I think that it makes its point that much more broad and clear to everyone. So I think that part of it really, really worked. Um, and just it I love the little moments. Like you have Jesse Plemons, who's in real life married to Kirsten Dunst, basically playing the same character he played on Breaking Bad. You cannot tell me that the guy who sits there and says, "What kind of American are you?" and shoots you if the answer is wrong. You cannot tell me that's not Todd from Breaking Bad, because it is.
There's some kind of misunderstanding here. What? Well, you're American, okay? Okay. What kind of American are you?
I loved the kind of idea of, this little town that's just pretending it's not happening.
There's like a pretty huge civil war going on all across America.
Oh, sure, but we just try to stay out.
Again, the logistics, I don't know how they're able to do that when this town over here, they're shelling the hell out of each other. Um, I like how, a couple characters talk about how, oh, my family, they're back on a farm in Missouri pretending this isn't happening because they're isolated enough that for them it's not. I thought that was, if anything, I think the movie was critical of not it was critical of, like, you can't keep your head in the sand. And I think that you have some people today that maybe are just, they're like, you know what? I just want to avoid it altogether. I don't want to pay attention to it. And I hate to tell you, but that's kind of how the last Civil War happened. You had a series of presidents, particularly James Buchanan, the one that preceded Lincoln, who's often called the do nothing president because he did nothing. He was so afraid to get involved. He's like, I'm just gonna pretend everything's fine. Meanwhile, tensions between the North and the South just kept growing and growing. That by the time you get Lincoln being elected, the South's ready to secede and start fighting, and he hasn't even taken office yet. And then after he takes office, the rest of the South secedes, and then they start fighting. So I think the movie is, at its core, its message is very simplistic. War is bad. No one wants war. But there's a lot more to it than that. And that maybe a lot of people are saying, is this movie dangerous? I don't think it is. I think anyone who actually watches it and comes out thinking a civil war would be awesome or necessary is definitely watching the movie wrong. Not that that doesn't happen. I mean, you you have plenty of people that will watch American Psycho and their takeaways, look how awesome Patrick Bateman is. And they're like definitely missing the point. Ultimately, it's Civil War is visceral, it's bloody, it's violent, and it kind of needs to be. It drives its point home. Its point may be simple, war is bad, don't have war. But maybe in our divided times, we need the message to be that simple because it's something very small we can all agree on. It's something very basic and simple we can all be on the same page about. So, um, definitely, let me know what you thought of it. Those of you who saw it, do you think we will actually have a civil war? I don't. Only because, and again, this some of the movie doesn't really get into that much, but just the devastating economic effect it would have. People in power on every side, it is in their best interest for there not to be. Just because it would, I mean, you see in the movie a ham sandwich costs $300, which again, don't see how a clothing store can stay open and operational not that far from there, but it is what it is. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all the stuff. If you don't, I was gonna say if you don't, you may end up being in the middle of a civil war, but I don't want to jinx it. So I'm just gonna say please like, share, subscribe, and every day is Halloween.